You are listening to the Neurodiversity Gold Podcast, broadcast from Neurodiversity Training International HQ, bringing you the proud neurodivergent and ally voices that you need to hear. Neurodiversity Training International, helping neurodivergent entrepreneurs, teams, non-profit and businesses to brand, market, master social media, and become thought leaders in the neurodiversity space. Visit www.neurodiversity-training.net. Here is your host, autistic best-selling author, keynote motivational speaker, two-time TEDx speaker, and CEO of Neurodiversity Training International, Jude Morrow.
Hello, everybody, and welcome again to the Neurodiversity Gold Podcast with me, Jude Morrow. And this week's topic is a really, really interesting one because all throughout the world, being autistic or neurodivergent in any way has been extremely frowned upon by almost every church, cult, new religious movement, and everything else. And I'm going to kind of start with a bit of a side note. I was in Toronto in 2009. And back then, that's when people were asking, oh, Scientology, what the hell is that? So I was walking in downtown Toronto and I saw the Scientology org. They call their churches orgs. And I went in and a very, very pushy staff member basically forced me to buy the steaming pile of dog shit, which is Dianetics, the Modern Science of Mental Health, which was written by L. Ron Hubbard in 1950. And I made the foolish mistake of giving them my address. And ever since then, my parents receive leaflets, pamphlets, and invitations to go to Scientology-related stuff. And for my guest today, I wanted to hear the kind of Scientology element of being autistic or neurodivergent, because they do feel that Scientology or that psychiatry and psychology and all these other things is evil and should be avoided. And I'm absolutely delighted to welcome to the show Ian Rafalco. Ian, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
And what I wanted to do first is I set myself a challenge at the start of the week is to describe Scientology as best as I could in one paragraph, just for the benefit of listeners who are thinking Scientology, what's that? So I'm going to give it a go, and if there's anything missing, I'd love you to let me know. So Scientology is a space alien cult with maybe 30,000 members worldwide, founded by science fiction writer L. Ron Hubbard back in the 1950s after publishing the aforementioned steaming pile of dog shit, Dianetics, the Modern Science of Mental Health in 1950. It started out like a self-help organization on the lower levels of learning, but on the upper levels, members learn about the overlord Xenu on OT3, who's responsible for giving everyone in the world disembodied, invisible alien souls called body thetans that have to be exorcised from the body. It is a pay-as-you-go religion, and where one has to audit, in air quotes, these invisible body thetans and thetan clusters, which costs often hundreds of thousands of dollars. Scientologists believe in past lives because L. Ron Hubbard said we live for trillions of years and are thetans, which means spiritual beings, and that people can have superhuman abilities. Even though in Hubbard's own life he suffered with obesity, balding, short-sightedness, hemorrhoids, psychosis, strokes, and breathing problems due to chain smoking, he marketed himself as a war hero, even though he wasn't trusted with any form of leadership role by either the Navy or the Army. Scientologists believe that psychiatrists are the cause of all the world's woes, and if you're experiencing mental ill health, it is because you're secretly or overtly acting against the cult itself, being Scientology. It is currently run by a tiny little wart called David Miscavige, and various lawsuits against the cult church have been filed in relation to human trafficking, physical and sexual abuse, false imprisonment, and labour law violations in their bases, like the Int base or their floating cruise base, Free Winds. Is there anything I've missed?
You hit the nail in the coffin. Let me tell you, that was just about it. I mean, I don't think I could have explained it that concisely, to be honest.
Like, that took me like a whole week to try and sum Scientology up in a single paragraph. And I mean, having been in the cult itself, I mean, what was it like growing up as a Scientologist?
Well, you're fed so many lies that your perspective and foundation on, what you're supposed to feel about yourself, and especially as a child, as a kid, there was no option to know what kind of development path I should be taking, especially by any scientific means. I was sort of the straight man. I had really hard times sort of reading cues and picking up on different things in my family. So I was sort of this kind of blunt person who kind of saw through in a sort of more pragmatic and practical way, and in the sort of ethereal, conceptual hoo-ha that is this belief system. It was kind of like, you just mask it till you make it. And there's a lot of repression and indoctrination. They have these films. Oh my God. They have these films. There's one called Man the Unfathomable. And they sat me down in these theater rooms. You can go to any Scientology org just to watch it. It's honestly, it's like an hour long, and it's the most ridiculously brutal and disgusting film that talks about how Scientology is the first organization in the whole universe that has ever provided solutions for man. And there's graphic imagery of the CIA cutting off people's heads, and psychiatrists doing brain surgery on children, and just like they bombard you with this sort of pseudoscientific view. So it's like you're already being controlled before you even start school. L. Ron Hubbard tried to get Dianetics into the APA, into the psychiatric field, but he was laughed at and like told that this is fucking ridiculous. You can't, none of this makes any sense. This is borderline psychotic. I actually remember reading recently that the book Dianetics has more claims, like the claim to evidence ratio is more than any other academic book in literary history. So it's so bizarre. And so he basically started a war against psychiatry. So any kind of mental health solutions that are needed for any kind of mental health questions are almost ignored by Scientology. And these little fringe outreach propaganda groups, one called CCHR, the Citizens Commission on Human Rights, which is a very active group when it comes to, for as small as they are, it's a very active group that fights the injustices of psychiatry by basically just trying to discredit psychiatry without offering any alternative whatsoever. They just think that,
except for Scientology.
Except for Scientology, because the reason that you have tics, or the reason that you have, you just picked up a broken body. If you have any kind of, when you dropped your you probably had some what are called overts or transgressions in your past lives, and which made it so that you deserve to be in this kind of like worse off body. And that's why you have these differences. There's nothing really special or about you. You're just you were a past life criminal, essentially. So
and what's interesting with Scientology is that Scientologists believe that you drop the body at the end of your life and then you go to a new one. And this process repeats on repeat for trillions and trillions of years, despite the universe only existing for 13.8 billion years as per scientific consensus. So, being autistic in Scientology, would that mean either A, you picked up a broken body, or B, that you pulled it in somehow?
Right. Yeah. So there's this idea that you kind of, it's sort of like a karma thing where you get what you put in, and you also get what you pull in. Like you do things, whether in this life or the past lives, which is ironic because in Scientology, you don't learn this until you get to the OT levels. But when you get to OT8, there's 15 supposed OT levels, although only 8 have ever been released. L. Ron Hubbard died in a RV in the woods when he was running from the law, so he actually never made anything past OT8. But it's this lovely promise, I suppose, that they're able to hold above people. But in OT8, you learn that none of your past lives are actually yours; they belong to the body thetans, and now you're actually you, and now you can do. It's like, but you just spent how many hundreds of thousands of tens, hundreds of thousands of dollars to solve these problems that you've been told your whole Scientology career, I should say, that, you know, you're going to handle these reasons why you are the way you are. And then you get there and they're like, oh, it was actually, it was all bullshit. It had nothing to do with you anyway. And you, like, I can't imagine. I mean, both my parents are at that level, and I can't imagine learning that and then not logically being like, well, there were several points where you contradicted this entirely, and I would like my money back for those pieces.
Yeah, exactly. And may I remind everybody that the Church of Scientology, at least in the US, has 501c3 tax exempt status. So basically, they are taking tax exempt dollars to teach people that their souls are body thetans, and when you give them at least $500,000 to get to the top of the bridge to total freedom, that those memories were indeed your body thetans, and people have left the cult after learning that. And
Yeah.
as far as whenever people leave the cult, that's when the shit really hits the fan, where they will chase you, they will hound you, they will abuse you under their fair game policy, which means that Scientologists believe that they can destroy someone entirely for leaving the cult. And I mean, as far as Scientology fair game, I mean, it's a popular podcast by Leah Remini and Mike Rinder, but are you feeling the effects of fair game, or?
Well, it's it's funny because to fair game me, because my father was such a he's kind of like the pseudoscientific internet guru, I guess you could say, on the subject of the ketogenic diet. I mean, he goes into some really weird conspiracies there, but he's kind of like, he has this sort of following. So but he's a massive donator, donates like tens of millions of dollars to Scientology. So to keep him on the hook, they have to sort of prove to him that because they claim the fair game policies were canceled, many years ago, even though they still constantly berate and harass and have these Twitter accounts and internet accounts. They have websites devoted to hating ex-Scientologists, and they use their whole name, like leahramini.com or MikeRinder.com or whatever. So I haven't received the most of it yet, but around the time that I left, there was so much legal pressure against the cult and David Miscavige and Danny Masterson and these other people who I just think they really haven't gotten around to me just yet. As much as they'd like to. I've had people that I grew up with, kids that I went trick-or-treating with as a child who scoured my friends lists on Facebook and told people that I'm some awful person and to block me. And it's a lot of personal, attacks, I guess, on myself. Like almost every friend that I had, I mean, if I could call them friends, but almost every person that I ever knew, because I'd grown up in this area. I only had a few people outside of Scientology and ex-Scientologists who don't associate with it anymore. I really only held on to a couple people. My family, they had to completely disconnect from me. I have two nieces who I guess I won't see for the foreseeable future. And my family, they say just horrendous things to me before they completely disconnected and blocked me on everything. But it's I think more's to come, but they kind of can't really attack me as much publicly without proving, I guess, to my parents that the same thing can happen to them if they turn against or if they question anything. Like you develop when you do auditing or when you involve yourself in the church and you do courses, you develop what's called a PC folder, which is a pre-clear folder, and it's because you can attain the state of clear, but before that you get a PC folder, a pre-clear folder, and they accrue and I had like 23 of these things, and it's just a list of every piece of paper that's ever been written on me. They also have an ethics folder, which is how they control you too. But they go through these things and they find every little piece of material against you that they can use against you, and in a very sort of aggressive way. And I've been in there since I was a child, so they have a lot of blackmail against me. I mean, not like it really matters. They can fucking release the whole thing. I don't give a shit. But they would have to sort of prove to my family that I think they're just trying to avoid that. They're trying to avoid making the cult look worse for these people who are donating millions of dollars to them for the time being. Although I doubt they would care very much, to be honest.
And what I wanted to kind of really touch on, which I think is important. I mean, being autistic is difficult enough at the best of times, especially when you're a child, because nobody really understands you. And I watched
Right.
a video this week from the channel Growing Up in Scientology, by Aaron Smith Levin, and his estimate of Scientologists in the world sits at 35,000. So if we use the figure that like 2% of the population is autistic, I mean there's 700 autistic people in Scientology. That's a lot of people. That's higher than a population of some little tiny towns, where whenever I was young, I was not subjected to. People were trying to help me, give me extra supports and stuff like that. But I mean, for you and the 699 other autistic kids in Scientology when you're younger, do you go through things like more sec checking, more auditing, more whatever? Are you treated much worse for that reason?
It's more of like you're a project. So in the way that you're discouraged from things like stimming and ticking and things like, I remember I had this my excitement is kind of like a heat level, I guess. Like when I get excited, it just burns hot, and I just, I could get very physically excited, and I used to shake my hands, in this very aggressive way. My family used to mock me for it. And they used to make fun of me, and they used to copy me. So I just learned that maybe to save embarrassment, I would stop doing these things, or, it builds narcissism in people to sort of, achieve this goal. So everybody lower than that, everybody who has these kinds of problems or difficulties adjusting, they sort of treat you like, oh, you're a project, or you're gonna cost a lot of money to sort of condition your autism away. I mean, I'm sure if you asked any practicing Scientologists, they tell you that autisms are caused by vaccines or some crazy shit, like my father believes. It doesn't really even matter whether or not they withhold their kids from getting vaccinated as children. They still get autism. So, or they still are born, how they're born. And I remember sort of realizing really early on that it was going to be much more difficult to survive if I didn't just sort of copy and identify the most survivable traits, like the most easily reproducible traits to survive and kind of be a different person for, whoever I was talking to or whoever I was working with, and being very agreeable and pretending like these things weren't problems. And it creates a lot of identity issues, and it also creates a lot of learning difficulties. I also suffer from ADHD, and in Scientology schoolings, they're completely allowed to mock you, push you harder. If you talk to I wanted to make friends in school, and if you talk to anyone during class, this is, I would get yelled at and sent to the school ethics officer, who assigned me a condition of treason, which is something they do in Scientology, because, I was an enemy of the group because I wasn't conforming well enough. And, I was withheld from certain activities, where all the other kids could go have fun. And I had, they put you to work. They make you do what's called messed work, which is just another word for physical labor. It's supposed to to get you out of whatever like sort of low grade behaviors, or what they'd call down tone, which is just like, negative. So kind of learning how to navigate this by just, masking. I mean, I have a sort of, I like to call it a piece of logic hardware, where it just is everything that I learn is kind of funneled through this, how does it make sense and why does it make sense? And it's become more of a tool, because everything's sort of funneled in. And so I kind of had to eventually ignore all the bad parts and kind of make it make sense for myself, which may be very effective at using it in certain ways. But I kind of just became like a tool, and you become, I mean, people, I've definitely seen people with more severe disabilities, especially social disabilities, and these people are kind of, still works in progress, where you can, you expect that they're just, if you think it's like a physical, somebody's like very aggressively nonverbal, or somebody has these issues that aren't as, like, they couldn't be on course, or they couldn't be in session, or, these are sort of lost causes that you keep around, that you do these things called assists on, and it's kind of just like you're just guiding them as a thetan, which is, their word for soul, spirit. You guide them as a thetan to just uplift them, and then maybe in the next life they'll have a good body, because then they'll die, and then they'll go pick up another Scientologist family's body, but they don't really have any solutions whatsoever, for these kinds of people. And I've worked with these people. I mean, I was, lucky enough at least to have found a survival strategy, and even deconstructing it afterwards. I didn't even realize how much I had really been taken advantage of and abused and not helped, because I never had a foundation, and the fear of, like, your whole family turning against you when you don't have anything to fall back on, and you have all these sort of problems figuring things out for yourself and adjusting and socializing. And it's like, you think everyone's going to bully you for your tics, or, the stress builds and it manifests in different ways. And, it's very aggressive, and it's very, how should I say, emotionally violent.
It definitely is. I mean, the psychological abuse in Scientology is very, very well documented. And I mean, the difference between, you and I, like whenever I was a little one, I mean, I had access, and even as a young adult, I had access to counseling, CBT, psychologists. Now, not every experience in that field was positive, but some of them were. And, people had their heart in the right place and wanted to help me. Whereas if I were like you in Scientology, you get none of that. Sure, you
None.
don't. None. Like, I mean, it's almost, it's strictly forbidden. Like, if I was a Scientologist and I was my own father, like, and I wanted to get external help for my child, surely that would be enough to label me a suppressive person or a potential trouble source, at least.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you definitely be PTS, which is, they love their acronyms, but you touch on something important, like, the action of seeking and the action of actually addressing it. Like, you'd have to go to somebody very specific, okay, like a specialist who does not necessarily prioritize, medication, which, could be an extremely expensive endeavor. And I'm sure that there are some people that, if you're savvy enough or stern enough, and you still refuse to medicate your child or have them see, any kind of other professional, you could probably get away with it. But, it's so few and far between. There's such conspiracy nuts that it's like, they believe that all psychiatry all psychiatrists used to be on what's called the whole track. Back a trillion years ago, they used to be invader forces that, trapped and, implanted spiritual beings with recordings of, they took a Thetan and shook him up and vibrated him sideways and showed him pictures of, naked bodies. And that's why you're so obsessed with X, Y, and Z. And it's like, the action of seeking just very straightforward, mental help is probably one of the most disastrous things you could do as a Scientologist. And you would get targeted and singled out, and they would they would report you. They're very good at,
snitching culture.
The snitching culture. So, and there's like 10 different kinds of reports. So, you can report each other, and any effort you make to have your child see an actual professional would be completely reported up the line, and you'd have eyes on you for sure. I remember this one kid when I was on staff in Atlanta at the Atlanta org. There was this one kid who we were trying to get on, and he had some psychiatric work done, because I guess he had sleep issues and emotional issues, and one day he came in and his hand was cut to shreds, and I was like, what's going on here? Apparently he woke up in the middle of the night in his sleep. He had put his hand through a window. He had just punched right through a window, and he had cuts all over his hand. And after I had, I panicked, and I tried to help him. I had to take him to the ER, and nobody else really seemed to know what to do. And then I guess they interviewed him, and they said, oh, well, he's had a history with the psychs, so he's actually the bad guy. And they actually blamed him for this thing that he couldn't control. He was actually, after that, told to leave and, taken off staff, because he just wasn't allowed. This kid needed like a lot of help. And, Scientology could do nothing for him, and actually refused to do things for him. It was really crazy.
That's really sad. And I mean, as far as Scientologists in the world, I think there's like I think there's kind of three species of Scientologists. There's Sea Org, which is like the kind of paramilitary naval fake thing whenever L. Ron Hubbard was in the run in the 60s, which is still going, even though they're not really at sea. Yeah. Then there's staff, the org staff, and then the just public Scientologists or parishioners.
Yeah.
Am I missing anybody inside those categories?
You got it. The Sea Org is composed of sort of it's what you hear, the billion-year contract that you sign, and it's not actually incorporated as an organization, so they don't have to play by as many rules as they should be held to. But the Sea Org can be of people who join, who are put to labor or smaller tasks, and then people at the upper echelon in what's sort of colloquially known as like watchdog organizations, such as RTC, Religious Technology Center, or Church of Scientology International. The RTC is really like the vipers and like the predator group that kind of like goes in and looks for things and is like, what are you doing? And they're very, very hostile people. And that's where David Miscavige sits.
And they just micromanage the shit out of everything. And for the next question, now this has brought up a slight kind of giggle over the last 10, 15 years of watching Scientology and following it and reading up about it and stuff, is that the term that Scientology uses for anyone who escapes is blowing the org. So I think as far for you, I mean, what was the moment where you thought, fuck this? And what was that process like of blowing the org?
It's funny. I'd had a lot of bad experiences, but there's always this idea that, this next step I take will help this problem, or, I just have to commit myself a little more and I'll solve this, this situation. And there's a lot of self-blame. There's a lot of shame involved. So there was a moment I went to the sort of spiritual headquarters in Clearwater called Flag. It's this massive building in Clearwater, to do what's called the Superpower Rundown, which is a very speculative thing, but it's essentially just a bunch of auditing. And then you go upstairs in this big room where you they got a bunch of fancy toys that you can play around with, and like a gyroscope to locate yourself in space. And it's like a bunch of conceptual hoo-ha. I realized that I didn't want to spend my whole life on staff, and I wanted to be, I wanted to pursue my personal interests, the thing I, committed myself to Scientology for. And so, I was sitting down and I said, I'd like to be a writer. I'd like to write, and I'd like to make movies. I find a lot of interest in that. And, they wrote that down as, what's called CI, counterintention. It's just you're thinking in the wrong direction here. And for 5 months, I was held at Flag. I wasn't allowed to leave my hotel room anywhere else than where they wanted me to go. I was used as free labor around. They own like 60 buildings in Clearwater, so I was used as free labor in some of those buildings. I was used as like a tool for training other people. I was just kind of on the hook. I couldn't go forward. I couldn't go backwards for 5 months. And my parents funded the whole thing. They didn't really care. And I was threatened that I would be declared if I declared an SP, if I had any, if I left or if I decided to go anywhere else. I was being watched essentially. So after I had expressed thoughts of, self-harm, let's say I was kicked out about an hour later. Like I had been begging to leave. So after I'd been like, maybe I'm just this broken thing, and I'll never be able to rise to these sort of ethical standards that they want me to. So I'll just, handle it the old fashioned way and end it all. And they were like, oh, well, you should have told us that before. Because we didn't think you were serious. And then I was like, oh, so I can leave? And they were like, yeah, you have to go find somewhere else to stay. And I went back home to, I ended my staff contract with Atlanta, and I went back home to stay with my parents for a while. And I just was like, I'm taking a break. I'm just going to stop this. And even up to that point, I hadn't really looked into any of the documentaries or the interviews with ex-Scientologists. It was purely just my negative experience with my family and with Scientology that kind of led me to, constantly feeling second or other or lesser or, like some broken thing. And, I talk a lot and I ask a lot of questions, and I'm very curious. And that was always very like strange to them. And, so, after I went back to my parents, I actually started piece by piece looking into it. I actually was married at the time. I met a girl in Scientology, and we got married at Flag. And, she that didn't last, because the more I questioned Scientology, the more she started to report me to the church, and the more she started to sort of snitch on me, and everything we were talking about became non-private. And then everything they did to sort of follow the rules just drove me further and further away. And then I got very low and very depressed and very reliant on substances to kind of numb all the extraneous thing. I'm very good at sort of hyper visualizing a lot of things in my head. So, going down these long sort of processes of, oh, this is how much worse your life's going to get if you come out and say, what happened. Like it was almost a guarantee that I'm either I stay silent and I keep these negative people in my life for the sake of the church, and I just never talk about anything that's ever happened to me, and nothing ever gets resolved, or I open my mouth for the first time in my life and I let people know that there's a problem here. And that was the correct choice, and that was the choice that I made. And I I sort of outed my father as a Scientologist, and just that alone, because they know that Scientology has a negative connotation. I just said that he donated millions of dollars to Scientology, and that was enough to be seen as such a appalling negative, and even that was like an indication to me that this group was doing some very shady things, and since then I've educated myself, and I've honestly gotten more support for myself socially and mentally than I ever had in the 23 years I was in Scientology. And it's honestly, I've made more growth like on a month-to-month basis than I did in the heaviest amount of training and auditing that I did. And I was trained as a Class 5 auditor, which is like as much as you can get. So without joining the Sea Org, because fuck that. I was efficient. I could, I have a very responsive memory, so I could always kind of learn a thing and then be able to break it down and be able to cross associate, the different references. So I was good at what I did, but that wasn't enough for them, and it led to me eventually leaving and being excommunicated.
And that's what being declared an SP is. It's the kind of Scientology version of being excommunicated at the pulpit in the Catholic Church. But
Yeah.
I wanted to ask, like, say, since leaving and getting on the neurodivergency kind of journey and learning about that, I mean, what has that been like for you?
It's been incredible, honestly, because you're so. I was so afraid, I guess, to admit that I was, what I had feared to be, which was some broken person. I thought I just maybe had some difficulties, or I personally thought that I was cursed by my past life overts. And, in reality, the emotional toll that it takes to not know specifically where to address my past, and, your past doesn't just disappear, it sits there, and, thinking that it could just, eventually, resolve itself was just part of the naive aspects that I had left over from Scientology. It culminated in a very stressful, I started having panic attacks. I couldn't sleep. I was having these very, very awful go of it. And then, it wasn't until then that I actually got help, and I started a GoFundMe, and because it was in a very low place, and people showed overwhelming support publicly, and I was actually able to start going to therapy and seeing a specialist and understanding, what happened to me, and what it was, what the reality is about the mind, and these different things that I should have known about myself much earlier, that would have made things so much easier, and a way to sort of the expectations I should have for myself as a person, and as someone who's on the spectrum. I never knew about masking, and I never knew about these certain things that I should have known about, and it actually like blew me away, because I was like, all of these things, I had sort of forced myself and trained myself for like mechanisms of survival to be this completely different person, and to not accept these kind of differences, and to not accept this discomfort, this supreme discomfort I had with certain social situations, and to kind of measure my excitement, and to reduce my sort of expression in a way that was very unhealthy. And so figuring out more so who I am, and I'm still on that journey. And I think, I don't think I'll ever stop learning. But it stopped me so heavily, because you do a lot of, like, you're forced to do courses, and you're in school, you're in Scientology schooling, there's something called study tech, which is this
Play models.
Yeah, clay demonstrations, and the missed the misunderstood word phenomena, which is like this thing that L. Ron Hubbard talks about, where every what's called non-optimum reaction to studying, if you're not, straight backed and completely still and studying, then you don't have troubles learning. You're just not looking up the definitions of words, or you don't have what's called lack of mass, which is like the lack of the real physical thing that you're studying. So you can't study anything without like actually seeing it in person or getting videos about it. It's like there's such a robust expectation for people, and especially children. So if you have ADHD, you are singled out as, just being a bad student, and you don't have teachers, you have supervisors, and they have targets that you have to meet, or else, so you're kind of learning to like kind of enclose myself in this like this sort of rigid structure of, don't move a muscle. Oh, I know you want to do this, but don't do this, because they're watching you. And I could like see all the eyes on me everywhere I was. And, you just kind of close it up. But learning to sort of let go and just kind of, express myself and not be harsh on myself when it comes to study. And it's actually improved my ability to study, to become, to loosen myself up, I guess you could say, especially all the damage that had been done sort of unmade me in a way where, I was just bottling every perceivable energy, emotional reaction, physical reaction. And it all kind of came out. I used to have this tick where my neck would bend to the side, and my mom would call it dramatizing, which is a term in Scientology that means you're acting in a way that expresses, your engrams or your overts, and it's like, and so I blame myself for those things, and I repressed those things, and I was like, oh well, I know that if I do it again, or if she sees me do it, that I'm going to get singled out, and I'm going to get, bullied for it at home. And so there's such an effort. It's like so exhausting. I would be this kind of perfect person during the daytime, and then the second I was alone at night, I would just collapse into like this dead, flat, depressed thing. I had substance abuse problems all my life because of this.
And you know what's actually, if given how difficult your life has been inside the cult of Scientology, and you talk about it being your past, these things happen in the past, but here's what I want everybody to take from this actual podcast is that there's kids going through that shit now, where I mean, L. Ron Hubbard's not regarded as like God in Scientology, but he can say and do no wrong, or said and did no wrong. And there are neurodivergent kids in Scientology still feeling now the way you feel, and I think it's fantastic that you're speaking out about this, and it's something that I want to. The reason why I wanted you on is because there are not just ND kids, but so many other kids in Scientology being treated really, really badly by antiquated bullshit methods by a hemorrhoid suffering, short-sighted man called L. Ron Hubbard. So I know you mentioned like a GoFundMe page. What's shitty about the US and a lot of parts of the world is the capitalist healthcare system, where I know you have set up a GoFundMe page to help with like therapy and support costs. Is that still live? And can we put that in the show notes for this episode and stuff?
I believe it is. I've been using it as sort of like a long-term fund. I believe it. I believe it's up until March or so.
That's fantastic, because and I would implore everybody to look in the show notes of this, even on my pages, the Jude Morrow pages, of the Neurodiversity Training International pages, the YouTube video and everything. I will put the link in the description, because what's great about the ND community is that we help each other out, we support each other, and I mean that's all there is to it. So I will put that in, and I would implore everybody to donate and help out, because that's what we do. we help our own. And Ian, that was a really, really remarkable kind of testimony that you've given. I'm so grateful for having had you on the show this week. It was absolutely mind blowing. I mean, this conversation could literally last hours and hours and hours, but
Yeah.
unfortunately, we are limited by episodes. And Ian, I can't thank you enough for coming on.
Thank you for having me. It's great to have people to talk to who actually know something about the subject. Especially in such a a vague area for a lot of people. But I truly appreciate it.
Well, thank you so much, Ian. And for this episode, you can stream this on Spotify, Amazon, all the lovely places. If we're not fair gamed by Scientology. I mean, funny enough, with David Miscavige, I actually had the joy and privilege of seeing the guy in person at the launch of the Ideal Org in Dublin many years ago. He's so heartbreakingly small. But we Dave can do what he wants in his power to persecute our tiny little podcast, the Neurodiversity Gold Podcast. And you can find more information about NTI and myself at judemorrow.com and neurodiversity-training.net. Thank you so much for listening, and I will see you all next week again for another edition of the Neurodiversity Gold Podcast.
Are you wondering how to launch yourself into the neurodiversity space quickly? Or are you happy to keep on guessing and networking endlessly? Neurodiversity Training International specializes in launching and rebranding new and existing coaching, mentoring, consulting, and non-profit ventures. Start your journey today and book a call with the Neurodiversity Training International team via www.neurodiversity-training.net.